Good afternoon, ladies, and only ladies here, and Josh. Thank you. And good afternoon to everybody who is watching this live. Welcome to another session. We have the graveyard shift. So commend yourselves. You need a round of applause for being here at this time. Right. Without further ado, we have a lot to get through this evening. And I know it's pretty boring, but unfortunately you have to cover it. And it is going to be featuring in your assignment, hence it is important. But before I get down to the lecture itself, there has been some confusion in terms of the quizzes, the activities, and all of that. Let me clarify. Activity 1, which was that forum that I put out right at the beginning, that unfortunately is closed. I cannot go back and open that now. Activity 2, which was the quiz, the first quiz, activity 3, which is the second quiz, there has been some confusion because people have registered late. I have extended it, so it is still open. Initially, it was supposed to only be open until the 29th of Feb. I have extended it until the 11th of March, or 10th or 11th of March. Your online task 1, which is for marks, you can see it's labeled involvement tracker 2, right? That is where the example was of the learner that was pregnant and which law applies, okay? Please do that. That counts for marks. So there was a problem initially, but with help of the experts, it was fixed. And now it is back, it's open. And if you were one of those people who had attempted it previously, you try to make your life easy. So you don't have to go back and retype it. You can click on the first one, the incorrect one, copy and paste your answer into the correct link, okay? And you should be fine. So where you see the word involvement tracker in the prefix of the title, note that is counting towards marks for you. So you will have many assessments that counts towards your marks. In total, there should be 10. I have put up many activities for you to do, but 2 of them counts towards marks. So one is titled Involvement Tracker 1, and that is quiz 3, okay, which is still open. And the next one is entitled Involvement Tracker 2, and that is online task 1, okay. The quiz, obviously, as the name says, it's just a quiz MCQ, multiple choice questions. So you just choose one answer there. So click, and that's self-marked. It's marked online itself. Your online task 1, which is the pregnancy example, that is marked by the lecturer. So I'm not expecting a long answer for that, something long or lengthy. It's for 10 marks. Literally everything that you write will get you a mark there if you write the correct things, okay? So follow the slides, follow the stuff that we did last week. I did use that example in class purposefully because I knew I was giving that to you, right? So if you paid attention last week, you should have an idea what you need to put in there. It's for 10 marks. Are there any other questions before we start with today's lecture? Any questions about the assignment, the quiz? Anything that you're confused about because it is for marks? In the other campuses? No. Okay. Right. So without further ado, let me begin with today's lecture. Right, so the outcome for today, we are going to be looking at language and education policy, the white paper 6 on education and training in a democratic South Africa, and policy on religion and education. Now, all 3 of this can be used in your first assignment. As I said, your first assignment should be due around the 10th week. So the lecturer that is going to come after me, after my time with you is over, she will explain that assignment to you in much greater detail, okay? She is the person who set the assignment. She is the module coordinator. But I will be marking part of it as well. But this is actually important for you. Right. So the first one, the language and education policy. So where is this derived from? Do you remember we did the national National Education Policy Act, right? At the beginning of when was that? The second week. Okay. If you look through your notes, we did the National Education Policy Act. If you look at that, and even the Schools Act that we did last week, a lot of it, many sections covers language in education. Now, this language in education policy is a spin-off from the National Education Policy Act. That is an act. That is legislation. That was enacted, signed by Parliament. Okay? So it went through all the procedures. This is a policy. So it's not really legislation in that sense where it is the original legislation. This is not the original. This is a piece of that. So this came after that. Okay. Why is it important for you? Because as I said, your assignment features a lot about language. Right? The aim of this policy was to recognize the cultural diversity of the country. Now remember, all these policies and the legislation started developing post-democracy. So once we gained democracy in South Africa, all of this started filling in and coming into place. So this was one of it. And as you can see, the aim was to recognize cultural diversity of the country, the languages, to respect the languages, to include sign language. So coming to the part about sign language, it has become such a compulsory aspect in that many institutes have to include sign language, including this institute as well. Okay, thank you. Hi, good evening.
Montana, the floor is
Ma'am, you're speaking to Modise.
Good evening, Modise.
Yes, ma'am. We currently busy with teaching practice.
Yes.
Now, today I was kind of like asking about the policy of expulsion. There
Yes.
is a learner that has something like 900 demerits already in the first semester, in the first term, in fact.
Yeah.
Now, they said that if she does any mistake, her parents have been called before, she's going to be suspended for something like 14 days.
Right.
Now, yes, last week, you said that a learner by law is supposed to be suspended for 7 days. So now that school isn't it practicing irregularly?
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you for your question. To answer that, I said initially they have to be suspended for 7 days at first. If during that 7 days and while investigation is going on into the matter, then they can extend that to 14 days. So has the learner already been suspended for 7 days already, or did they go straight into saying that she has to be suspended for 14 days?
At first, it's like they called the mother.
Yes.
Now, she is on thin ice, and then she's continuing to be irrational around the school. Now, she was told that she's going to be getting those demerits, and then up until a certain point, if she continues, because there's a hearing that is outstanding for her, and then from there, if she does anything before the date of that hearing, she's going to be suspended for that 14 days.
Okay, so legally, she's supposed to be initially suspended for 7 days at first. Then it can go on to 14 days. So there is some malpractice for going straight into 14 days. However, you are saying that there is an investigation, a hearing going on at the moment. So they probably
Yes, ma'am.
already told her, gave her a warning. But still, with the warning, she should initially only be suspended for 7 days and not 14 straight away.
Okay.
Do you have any idea if they told her initially that she's suspended for 7 days?
I did not question further because I did not understand the with a hearing that is due sometime next week.
Okay, okay, sure. Probably they did tell her about the 7 days initially, hence the hearing is going on, because while she was on suspension, the hearing had to start. Therefore, now that 7 days probably has passed, therefore they're extending it to 14 days. But
Okay, ma'am.
thank you for your
Yeah.
question, Madise, and I'm so glad that you're applying what we're learning in class to reality. It's good to know. Thank you. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, ma'am.
Anybody else? Any other questions? No. Okay. So as I was saying, sign language it has become one of the important factors. It comes down to us trying to embrace equality. So if we say that we have 11 official languages, what about those people who have to use sign language, right? So we need to embrace the language that in its own is a language as well. So in the very near future, and even now, there's many schools that encourages and that looks out for sign language. They have to have people or educators teaching sign language at school, right? Sign language, because we're speaking about language, that's one. But then there's other things like people who have issue with eyesight, the braille that they have to use. Many institutes, tertiary institutes, if a person has an issue with their eyesight, they have to have the exam in a braille format as well, sign language as well. There's even this institute has incorporated that, where some lectures has sign language included in that as well, right? So respects all languages. Now that is where the issue comes, and there can be a lot of conflict. Remember, we have 11 official languages. The question then comes to, in a school, in a public school, how do you choose which language is to be the medium of the school? How do you choose which language is to be an additional language, or which language should be taught? What can be offered? Obviously, if you look at the economic factor, resources are scarce. In order to get an educator to teach maybe 2 learners for a certain vernacular, it does become a problem, right? So it may be unfair to those learners, but at the same time, you're looking at the logistics of it as well. But according to the policy, you have to respect all languages, and the policy encourages a school being multilingual, right? So even if the school is an English-based school, English medium school, the home languages has to be maintained, as you can see, and additional languages as well, okay? As we go further on, you can see the reason for the additional languages in terms of the policy. Are there any questions on this? Can I move on? Yes. Teaching in sign language. Teaching. The teaching sign language part, that's another aspect. That is where teaching sign language, you would have to be go to a tertiary institute. But teaching in sign language, that's a good question. It's very ambiguous. Right. It's to develop programs for the redress of previously disadvantaged languages. Now here as well, I know there's a lot of conflict around this previously disadvantaged. So how then do you qualify previously disadvantaged languages? Surely, if there's 11 official languages, then do we say how many of them were disadvantaged in the past, right? How do you accommodate all of that in the school? So just to divert from that point, in the past, when I lectured another module, there was this issue of one of the writers had this issue of writing literature in a language that's native to you, your own vernacular. And then the argument was, if you write it in your own language, you need to understand your intention of what you're doing it for. So is your intention to make money, or is your intention just to share what you feel about whatever you're writing about? So obviously, if your intention is to make money, it would not reach as many people as you would like it to, right? So writing in your own language, that's the problem. But if your intention is to just express what you feel, then you can. Now, some of the students at that point were like, but English is the most common language. Surely it would be useful then to write in that language. And then if you think about if you're going to be making money and you want your book as a bestseller, if you put it out internationally, is English the most used language in the world? No. Right? So, but that's international. That's obviously an economic aspect. Coming back to a school level, here, obviously, we're trying to decrease that barrier that was put out a long time ago and trying to bring about equality, right? And this is how the language policy comes into use. So all learners shall offer at least one approved language in grade 1 and grade 2. When we say learners, we're actually talking about the guardians that does that for them, because remember, the learners are minors, right? So they do not have the capacity to make a choice on their own. So the parent has to choose which language subject they're going to be doing at school. As you can see, now when I read through the language policy, it is long. So what you see here is actually simplified points from there and a summary. So this is not the entire language policy verbatim. I have summarized this. I did put up the link for the language policy, which I think is very useful for you because you are going to be using that piece of document in your assignment as referencing. Okay, so you need to read that. The link is up on the ECI page. This is just a summary and the points that I thought are important for you. Okay, so some of you are looking so bored. Is it that boring? Or is it just you're tired at this point in the afternoon? You can't wait for it to be over. All of us, right? I promise I'll try and be quick. So as you can see, the last bullet point, the parent exercises the minors learners' language rights. Do you think a child at 14 then has the capacity to choose the language that he or she would want to learn in? Here we're talking about grade 1 and 2 and grade 3. A child at 14 is in high school. Do you think a child at that age has the capacity then to make a choice? Yes. Who thinks no? You don't think so? Okay. Okay. Anybody from the other campus? Okay. Right. Let's move on. Since I don't plan on keeping you here till 7. Right. So this is still part of the policy. This is just a heading entitled The Rights and Duties of the School. This is still part of that language policy that we're discussing, right? So the rights and duties of the school, the governing body of the school, and if you recall from what we did in previous lectures, the governing body has to stipulate how multilingualism is promoted in the school. So remember, the governing body also drafts the policy, the school policy, on what language will be used, okay? As long as there is no conflict with the Constitution. For example, they don't do anything that is out of line with the Constitution. But the governing body has the power to decide which language will be the language of medium in the school. And also in regard to which additional subjects or languages will be offered as fully fledged subjects, and how it would be immersed in the school. Okay. Programs such as, like, if you want to run, so the language itself is decided by the governing body, but the programs of how to run these languages, the actual task of how it would be implemented, that is decided and approved by the head of the provincial education department. Why do you think the governing body has this honor of deciding what language will be used in the school? Obviously, the head of Department of Education is higher than this governing body. Perfect. Perfect. Absolutely true. Your colleague says the governing body is made up of parents, which obviously belong to the community. As we looked at how students or learners would come from those areas that are closer to the school. So obviously, the parents in the governing body would have a better understanding of what language is needed. And we're looking at the majority of students here. Maybe the minority of students, their language will be an additional language at school. Right? So the rights and duties of the provincial education department, they have to keep a register of requests by learners for teaching in a language medium which cannot be accommodated by schools. And so if you recall the case that we spoke about last week, the micro-primary case, where the medium of teaching in that school was in Afrikaans, and where they wanted to incorporate English for the 40 learners, which then became 21 learners, right? And then eventually everything just was wiped out, and they did not accommodate those English learners in school. So in a case like this, there has to be a register because the school could not accommodate for those students, right? It's the duty of the provincial department then to find a way, by exploring and finding a way, to accommodate those learners. Can I move on? Right, so that was the language policy on education. As I said, that is just in a nutshell, it's the gist of it, because I'm going through 3 pieces of policies and information here. I had to summarize each one, or else it would be too long. And it's something that you can read on your own as well. So I do not expect you to know each of it verbatim. Focus on the important points, focus on the points that I drew to your attention on the slides, but you need to have a general understanding of the document as a whole. I think one is about 4 pages of this, one is about 19 pages, but it's quite repetitive as well. So you can read it, you'll get the gist of it. Okay, so this is the white paper on education. And white paper, why is it called paper? It's a piece of law. Why is it a paper? Okay, in the beginning of this module, I brought to your attention the fact that whatever's called legislation as an act, it had to go through all these processes before it reached that point. So one of the first stages of it is when it's a paper still, right? So they start drafting it here. And then they put it, then they get the public to look at it and view it and give their input as a bill. And they put it in the government gazette. And then after that, once it gets reviewed and goes through a number of processes, then only does Parliament sign it and enact it as a piece of legislation, as an act. That is how it finally becomes an act. So this white paper is still in one of the grade R level of it. It's still at the bottom. It hasn't reached the part of being an act as yet. Okay, but as you can see, this was in 1995. So this was a long time ago. Why is it significant? Because as I've put there, democracy, right? Remember 96 was your constitution. So after 94, here in 95, this already started taking shape. They already started drafting this. Now this focuses on education and training. Once again, the aim of this is to try to readdress the past, and to bring back some sort of equality from the past. Okay, and the language was about the language issues. Here it's on education and training. So basically training people in terms of the education sector, people who were previously disadvantaged, right? So it's noted as the first step towards the transformation of the education system. So this basically saw a transformation in the education system, and it allowed for the introduction of official languages in schools. So this was the starting point of it. It also introduced the NQF level. So now when you look at NQF level, this is where it came from. It also introduces the NQF level. For example, if it's X level, it's associated with a certain credit point. That is how now you get, okay, I'm registered for this module. NQF for this module is X. The credits for this module at the end of it, once I complete by passing, that is getting my 50%, I will get X amount of credits. In the end of it, it will add up all my credits, and then that is how I will get my degree or qualification. Right? So this is where it stemmed from. Again, it focuses on education and training. And you can see adult basic education and training. Now, how many of you are familiar with these centers where they offer adults to rewrite their matric exams? Or this is how it started. This was part of it, that way it started to allow. Yes, ma'am. Oh, but your hand was up. And how did you, okay, so should I share that with the class? Okay, so your colleague says that she did her matric to one of these centers. How did you feel it? How did you feel it? So you feel there's a lot of support in that, right? Okay, so something good has come off this then. Is there anybody else? Any other questions from the other campuses? Okay, so adult basic yes, ma'am.
Thank you again. It's Modise once again. Ma'am, I'd like to know, this white paper,
Yes.
did it have anything to do with inclusion of people with special needs? Because by the time it was said, there was something like 280,000 dropouts of people with disabilities, because they would be mainstreamed, and after a certain time they would be neglected, and then a lot of them would be called dropouts, and nothing better of them would come out.
Okay,
Could
thank
you
you, Modise,
explain
once
that?
again for your question. I see you've done a lot of homework on this, which is a good thing. You've got your stats right. So yes, this did try to address that, but it did not go into depth. It just tried at this point to address that. The focus was more on basic education and training. There's another document which talks about inclusive education, similar to this, but it's not in this document itself. This just mentions it. There's another document which you will be covering in your 6th and 7th week of lectures for this module. So watch that space.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You can see here as well, it looks at higher education. So this actually is what pushed forward for getting more tertiary institutes, right? Higher education. And then also looking at a focus on ECD, your early childhood development programs. So as you can see, this actually covered a whole lot. It covered a range, it covered school, it covered higher education, it covered adult basic education, as well as ECD programs. Why do you think it was so important to cover ECD programs? You can see there I have from birth until 9 years old. That is the phase for ECD, right? Okay, okay, okay. Of training them. No, you are right. The focus of this as well, there's in the past there was not a lot of attention given to the psychological impact on children. You want to add something now? Yes.
Okay, I wanted to say that psychological theorists prove that there are different stages that a child has to go through in order for them to fully develop. So your child goes through the oral phase, the phallic phase, and then the anus phase. So if any one of those phases are skipped, then you don't properly develop the child, and later on in their life they end up having addiction issues and all of that roots back to them having incorrect early childhood development care.
Okay, so thank you to your colleague, and thank you to one of the students that are watching online live. They've also posted a comment. Let me first respond to you, ma'am, and then I'll respond to the person who's watching live. So she says correctly, we see she's got a knack for psychology about the different phases of development for a child, and correctly spoken, if a child, it is said that if a child misses out on any of those phases, it can lead to something else in their adulthood. In the past, it was not given such attention that it's so important and vital for a child to go through all those phases. It's just taken as you're a learner, you go to school, you finish off, and that's about it. But now a lot of importance is given to that. Coming back to the person who gave the comment, the learner, the student who gave the comment, she says that it's got to do with the cognitive skills as well, which is absolutely correct. As I mentioned some weeks back, the cognitive skills of learners is limited at a certain age, but it's developed in school, right? Don't you feel that the educators have more contact at times with learners than a parent? Especially in the modern world, where both parents are working, right? The learner goes, even at this age, from birth till 9 years old, the learner is at school or at a creche, and afterwards it's at aftercare. So the person, the educator, has more influence in the learner's life, which then comes back to the fact of how important it is to be an educator currently. You have such a role to play in a young child's life. Right. Is everybody okay? Can we move on? So that was your white paper, right? That was the white paper. And as I said, I picked out the most important things of the white paper in the previous slide. Now we're moving on to the policy on religion and education. I know it's a lot to take in for one afternoon. We're just going through information just like that, but I try to keep it simple. So as you can see, it's actually titled the Government Notice Department of Education number 1307 in the year 2003. And then it's called the National Policy on Education and Religion. This as well is a spin-off from your National Policy Education Act. Okay, so again, from there, from one of the sections in that act came this. And because of that section, this was now drafted. And this is in the format, it was still a government notice. So literally, they literally put it in a paper as a notice from the government. And then the public has a chance to review this and give the input. And then afterwards, it goes back for review, it becomes a bill, then it becomes legislation afterwards, right? So this at the time, so this is obviously focusing on religion and education. And then you need to look at the relationship between religion and education. Now, it's a very touchy topic. It can lead into a lot. And this was determined by the Minister of Education at that time, Minister Qadir Asmal. Okay. The reason for this policy and for this section, in terms of even the act, the original act, it's in line with Section 15 of the Constitution. Now, remember, even if you're feeling like you don't know what's going on, any assignment, any test, as long as you can come up with the Constitution, some section from there, you're on your way home. Okay? Because that's the highest form of legislation. And if something's in the Constitution, then everything else below that or anything else, if it's not in line with the Constitution, it cannot be used. Right? So Section 15 of the Constitution recognizes freedom of conscience, religion, thought, belief, and opinion. Now this opens up a whole lot of issues. How far can your thought, belief, and opinion go? And if my memory does not fail me, last week I asked that question, and one of your colleagues, I think it was her, that mentioned it can go, and she was sitting there, it can go as far as if it does not amount to hate speech, right? So then you basically have to teach this in school as well, where it's okay for you to have your opinion. It's okay for you to be free in thought, express yourself. Yes, we're trying to bring in equality. Yes, we're trying to make everybody equal. But at the same time, you cannot step the line where it amounts to hate speech or infringes on the next person's right. Hence comes in the law, we're trying to balance this. So here we're saying there's no state religion. So our state, South Africa, does not have one specific religion. Okay, some countries do, where there's only one religion that has to be followed in that country. But we're saying that SA has a diversity of religion and culture, and this policy recognizes this and tries to create an interaction between schools and different faiths. So in the past, there were a lot of separate schools that focused and taught in only the entire policy or content of school focused in terms of one religion. Now, after this policy and after democracy, the aim was to try and get schools as multi-racial as possible, right? Also, to bring about the fact of protecting the learners or the young people against discrimination. So the idea here is if you can instill this in a young child, they will probably grow up with accepting a multiracial environment. Right? This again was another way of trying to reduce what had happened in the past. Right? The policy aims to extend the concept of equity, and that's what I just spoke about, and recognizing the diversity of our country. Now, the second bullet point, which looks at religious observances, should or can a child be forced to follow a religious observance? No, no. Where an argument can come in there is if a child goes to a school that teaches in a certain religious way only. And you will see the next slide and after this, that schools are allowed to do that. You can get a school, that is why you still get some schools which only focus, it can only be a specific religious school. So the content is still academic in the sense of the Western sense. So they don't only teach you about your religious scripture, but the school, the following of the school is based on a certain religion. Now, if a child who's not that religion attends that school, is a child then forced to observe the religious observances in that school? That is the question. Do you think a child then should be forced to observe a religious observance in that school because they are attending that school now? What are your thoughts on that? Okay, if there's no thought in that, as you can see there, the policy is not prescriptive, right? It just provides for a framework. So if a child is in a school where it's a school of a certain religion only, it would come down to when they sign the admission form, when the parent signs the admission form. So for example, if in the admission form, part of the disclaimer was that the child will have to then observe everything that the school does, then the parent might have less of an argument later on to go back and say, but my child is another religion, they cannot follow the observances in the school, right? However, an argument can go further from that because according to the Constitution, you have freedom of thought and belief, right? So there's there's said to be 4 models on this relationship between religion and education. The first one is the theoretical model. These actually make for nice MCQ questions, right? Where the state is identified with one religion, as in the whole country is identified with one specific religion. Now, I'm not going to mention religions, but in South Africa, obviously there's a large denomination of one religion, but the other religions are also acknowledged. So it's not like just one religion is said to be the only religion, right? So we definitely do not follow the theoretical model. Then you get the repressionist model, whereas that is that there's no religion. No religion should take precedence in that. So basically, if it's a repressionist model, that country's constitution shall not acknowledge customary law or religion or culture, right? Then you get the modern circular state model. That is impartial. It's neither religious nor anti-religious. And then you get the cooperative model, right? There's separate spheres for religion and the state, which are established by the constitution, but there's scope for interaction. South Africa follows the fourth model because we do have the constitution, which is the law. We do recognize religion, but we try to blend the both together and have an interaction. So we try for the constitution to acknowledge religion, hence the school, hence what you learned for this afternoon session. Everything had to do with trying to bring in equality of the different religions, the different languages, and incorporate that into the schools. All right, so South Africa follows the fourth one. Right, some of the aspects that it tries to focus on, this policy on education and language, sorry, on religion and language, is equity, tolerance, diversity, openness, accountability, and social honor. Now, equity, we're taking that straight from the Constitution, but it's also in this policy, sorry, on religion and education. Tolerance, tolerance for what? Tolerance for each other, basically. That is what it's looking at. Tolerance for being able to respect each other's diverse backgrounds. Then you have diversity that's self-explanatory. Openness, okay, that is to introduce children and learners at a school to the diversity of the country. Accountability and social honor. Once again, account for each of us, account for our religion, account for language, but account on a big scale, account in a school environment. And then social honor, that is basically to uphold what the constitutional values, what it tries to promote. Okay? I do not expect you to know each one of this in depth, each one of these 6 points in depth. Hence, I just went through it briefly. It's just for you to know that this is part of it, but it's not for you to know in depth about each one. Right, the application of the policy. It covers the different aspects of religion education and the religious observances, and it's applicable in all public schools. The reason why the word public is there is to show you that private schools can have their own policies, right? And as you can see, the second one is citizens do have the right at their own expense to establish independent schools. So that is what I said earlier on. So as much as it is that you have to have a school with multilingualism, right? But a school, an independent school can be established. So hence we still have some schools that practice one religion. So it can be, but it's an independent school, and it has to be in line against, it has to avoid racial discrimination. So for example, if you want to establish a school in certain religion, based on you can establish it, but it's not to say that you're announcing that that religion is superior. Once you start doing that, then you are bringing up, and then you start talking ill of another religion, then you bring about racial discrimination. Okay. It has to register with the state, so the state needs to know of this, and it has to have standards that are not inferior to other public educational institutions. So there's a lot before you can actually establish an independent school in one religion. Okay. Are there any questions on this? Yes. Okay. So we have a question from somebody who's watching this lecture online, and it's actually very sensitive. So please forgive me. I'm just speaking this question out aloud, right? It's not my thoughts. It's what the person sent. So the question was, does the school have the right to force the learner to remove the hijab? No, the school does not have the right unless in their policy or in their admission form, there was something about a learner cannot wear any religious garb to school, or a learner cannot come to school in a certain attire. If it was mentioned there and the parents signed for that, then the child can be asked to remove it. However, there's been a lot of issues around this, and because of that, and because our constitution allows for freedom of religion and belief, hence it is now taken as a given that learners are allowed to dress in a certain way. For example, wear the hijab to school, right? So to answer that person's question, no, the school cannot force the learner to remove the hijab if it was not in as a disclaimer in their admission form. So when they're speaking of headgear,
It's ma'am, hello. It's
hello,
Montana
hello,
again.
yes?
What do you
sir.
say? Yes,
sir.
ma'am. I was saying, if the school has a code of conduct,
Yes,
according to the question that you just answered now,
yes.
if the school has a code of conduct and then it says that learners should not wear or have their rosaries or what, if they are Christians, they should just be in normal uniform.
Yes.
Isn't that a contradiction of the code of conduct and this policy as well?
Yes, sir, you have a good question. That is a contradiction, because if you look back at the previous weeks, what we spoke, especially the Schools Act and the Code of Conduct, the Code of Conduct cannot be drafted in a way that is in conflict with any of the constitutional rights. So that in itself should not have been passed. If that answers your question.
Okay, ma'am.
Does it make sense? It is in conflict. If the code of conduct does not allow for a learner to wear this certain religious item, but if it's not something that's okay. For example, let me give you an example to make this clear. Right, this is the best way I can explain it. I'm sure most of you are familiar. Not too long ago, there was the issue of the Pillay case, right, where the learner wanted to wear a nose pin to school, and it went on, and the parents said that it's for religious purposes, okay, and it was against the school's code of conduct to wear a nose pin because it was seen as jewelry, okay. Eventually, the Constitutional Court allowed for it because they said it was part of her cultural rights. So what I'm trying to do is show you an example of how cultural rights can outweigh the code of conduct of the school, but depending on if it if it infringes on another person's right. So for example, that nose pin did not infringe on another person's right. In a similar way, the hijab would not infringe on another person's right. However, as one of your colleagues from this campus pointed out, talking about headgear, for example, if you're looking at like a cap, then that would amount to cheating in an exam room if you're wearing a cap. But I think it would also have to be looked at case by case. Does that answer your question, sir? Mr.
Okay,
Matisse?
ma'am. Let's make an example. Here we have a kid that is maybe in grade 7.
Yes.
Like this term, he's still growing his dreadlocks. And once second term, the dreadlock starts having a problem. Will
Yes.
that be incorporated in this policy, or
Okay.
they,
So
they have
let
to
me ask
expel
you
the learner or something?
No, let me ask you the question. Is the dreadlocks for religious purposes?
Yes,
There was a
ma'am. Let's
case,
say,
not about some time back about a Rastafarian who argued that his dreadlocks was part of his cultural right. And eventually he did win because it was said to be his cultural right. Obviously, he had to have it maintained and not left open and tied up, but he was permitted to have dreadlocks because it was part of his, he could prove that it was part of his cultural right. Therefore, he was allowed to have it.
no, it's clear now, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. When we have a live answer, right, a live example, makes it better for me. Thank you, ma'am. Right. Is there anything else that anybody would like to add? Yes. Oh, wow. No. So she was victimized. However, in terms of the legal world, that case became a very historic case. It actually marked a benchmark for us because it reached all the way up to the Constitutional Court, and it brought about a change of how culture should be acknowledged in schools. No, definitely. I think that is more of the issue of the educator and the principal actually having an issue that that the learner won instead of them. It's actually diverted from the cultural impact issue of it. Okay. Sorry, Josh, you were saying there's a question. Okay. So almost ending, right? These slides will be up on ECI, so most of this you can read on your own. And then also, it does allow for educators to be employed to teach a specific religion at school. So that educator would then can be a specialist in that field or that language or that religion and teach at a school. But they would have to then also register with the South African Council of Educators. And that educator does not necessarily have to be of that religion. So they can specialize in it, but they don't have to be from that religion or speak that language. I mean, well, they have to speak it, but they don't have to be of that religion in order to teach it, right? That's what I say here, right? It's not SCS. It's supposed to be E. My bad. That's a typo on my side, right? And obviously, the person who's appointed as this has to be sensitive to all religions, right? And then the curriculum, this is just to back up. As I said, I want you to read this. It will be available on ECI, right? And you can see bullet point number 2. No learner should be forced to observe or participate religious observance. So that's there. Right. So your conclusion is that the language policy, the white paper 6, and the policy on religion education were drafted in order to minimize and eliminate the barrier that was created prior to democracy. Okay, as I said, I'm stressing it's important for you, it's important for your assignment, right? Are there any questions before we can call it a day? Apart from if you can go. Any other question? Okay. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you to all the people watching live and the other campuses as well. Have a lovely evening.